we're going to talk about where the 50s came from, where we got this idea that we have to create this cookie cutter, cardboard cutout of the perfect family, the perfect society, this suburban utopia. The image of the family that is promoted is just sterile. It's bland. The suburbs are the Cracker Barrel rebrand of living conditions. In the cities, we have factories being built, and there are no labor laws. The Industrial Revolution is a nightmare for the family. Finally, some labor laws are implemented, but at the same time, the First World War kicks off. This is kind of the first time when mass production mindset gets put into warfare. So this is kind of the first time that men are going to war and not really able to prepare themselves before the battle. The kind of warfare that man was designed for was the kind where you can look your opponent in the eye as you killed him.
And this, by comparison, is a slaughterhouse.
We have Henry Ford come in, who is going to basically completely change how we think of industry and how we think of factories. Ford significantly drives down the cost of labor by introducing the assembly line system, which is what produces the Model T, which, by the way, wasn't even a good car. Henry Ford also introduced the idea of the company store, which was basically a form of wage slavery. Everything that you will need, all of your basic survival needs, are going to be in the store. But you can only purchase things from the store in this company currency that I'm paying you. So you're punching a hole in a piece of metal for 8 hours a day, and you can't even go and buy something actually nice for your wife. One day in 1929, all of a sudden, buy what? Sell to who? Everything comes to a standstill. Now you're out on the street, and your entire family is out on the street, and that happened basically overnight.
But at least if you make the food, there will always be a need, so you can survive that, right? Nope.
So who makes the food? Farmers. And who was like the most recent person or group to be affected by the Industrial Revolution? Farms. It creates the Dust Bowl, which is basically when the most major agricultural states in this country got turned into deserts.
A famine that literally affects everybody.
And now we're being thrust into a second world war. We put the pedal to the floor and we do World War II. Same as the first, a whole lot louder and a whole lot worse.
What are we drinking tonight, Ethan?
So this, which I have upon your recommendation, and this is my second glass of because I drank it all beforehand because it's that good, is Old Forester. Which is a really good bourbon. I think the first time I tried it, I didn't care for it quite as much. Okay. It felt like it was too smoky. And I don't know if that's just because I had just broken the seal on the bottle and not let some oxygen get in there. Because sometimes, even letting whiskey breathe can help cut some of the, or bourbon, I should say. Even letting that breathe can help cut some of the smokiness of it. But
no, sure.
I like it a lot right now. And the last couple of times that I've had a glass of my corn whiskey, it just tasted very, very strongly of corn. So it could be because my palate has modified itself to that this is a little bit different. But this is actually quite good.
Okay.
And I'll be recommending this in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a reason people love Old Forester 100. So just a step above the basic Old Forester 86. And it's got what I think of when I think of Old Forester, like the thing that makes it unique, is the distinctive Old Forester banana note that can come through in their whiskeys.
Is that what that is?
Yeah, there's a banana note in there.
It's like a single note, but it's definitely there.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I say this as someone with no sophisticated palate really at all, but even I have been able to pick up on that at times. Like, it can be really good. So. Exactly.
Now I need to take a sip of it, expecting the banana.
Yeah, do that.
There is banana. It's in the after. It's in the aftertaste.
Okay.
It's like in the. I don't know what that's called. In part of the harmony at the very end of a song, where the melody holds straight, and then the harmony does something like something like that. That's what the banana is.
Okay.
At least that's where I'm getting it from. Is after the initial hit.
Okay.
But I'm getting it in the aftertaste when it lingers on the tongue a little bit. And the tongue has managed to work through everything else, and all that's left is the banana.
I like the musical quality of that analogy, if I do say so myself. So
I know nothing of music theory. I just have a half decent voice. I'm just okay at singing.
good enough. Good enough. For my own drink, I have New Riff Single Barrel. So,
Ooh,
um,
that
New
sounds
Riff's
fancy.
it is. It is. New Riff's is a good brand that um, I've heard basically nothing but good things about. And the only thing I've bought from them actually is their single barrel. I have yet to buy their standard stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but their standard stuff is also only a couple bucks cheaper than the single barrel, which I would not
Oh,
expect from most brands. So it was like, like first time I just decided to get single barrel, and second time I did the same. So, and with single barrels, the proof will be odd. So, like the proof is 108.3.
well, see, then you have the added benefit of being able to sound pretentious when you're describing it. It's 108.3 proof.
If you do that,
Being
yeah.
pretentiously exact when you're telling people about the proof.
Fair enough. They do some really neat stuff with whiskey, though. Like they have a Balboa rye that they do. So, like,
Please tell me it has Sylvester Stallone's face on it.
no,
Damn it.
no. But that's like a heirloom type of rye grain and such. So it's neat that they would put a run of that out.
You told me
And
Balboa Rye, and I was expecting a whiskey bottle with Adrian on the front of it.
nah, they could do that, but they honestly don't need to mess with anything because that type of bottle design is
Ooh.
just sick.
Now that
Especially
is a
the
nice
black,
bottle.
the black graded down to clear glass. I
That's a
really
slick
like
bottle.
that.
I normally don't like having a wrap on a bottle of whiskey because I think whiskey and bourbon, they just have that gorgeous amber color all on their own. And I want to be able to see the color of a whiskey before I buy it. Because if it's just like really, really, really dark, I kind of don't want anything to do with it because it's just going to be way, way, way too smoky or way too tanniny. But I do like that where it's got like the black plastic wrap on it and then it goes down into clear.
It's not a plastic wrap, actually.
That's colored. They colored the glass black.
Yep.
Ooh, that's even better.
Yeah. Or if they wrapped it, that's like microscopically thin. Like that's so you would
That
not
makes it.
get.
There's
There's a texture change.
texturing on the bottle, isn't there?
Um,
Or there's like a raised
there's
print
this
of
stuff
some
right
kind.
here, which
Yeah.
which also says that as another perk of it, this is non-chill filtered for any bourbon snobs out there that are listening. So
I have no idea what that means. I just like to drink. And now that's going on another shirt. I don't know what that means. I just like to drink.
I'm no expert on it either. My loose understanding, feel free to correct me, listeners, is non-chill filtered means it's not going to be as clear as other
Okay.
whiskeys, but I think you retain more of the flavor or something like that when you do that. So
Okay.
anyway, I like that. So, and it's got a
Very
nice,
good.
it's got a nice dark color. Like it's not as dark as like a double oaked Woodford, which is just really dark.
See, what I really like is I like the nice amber color. Like what
Yeah,
this has. This has a really good solid amber that looks like it has a mosquito trapped into it that we're gonna make Jurassic Park out of, that kind of thing.
Okay.
I don't know how else to describe it. It's just amber, kind of like a few shades lighter than maple syrup.
Okay.
Or I suppose if you're Canadian, it's like the exact shade of maple syrup. In case any Canadians are watching and you're yelling at me because apparently Americans know nothing about maple syrup.
I don't know. This looks pretty close to the color of maple syrup.
It's not bad. Yeah. About
Yeah,
the color of maple syrup is what I look for in a whiskey, and it's really, really good.
Fair enough.
That's usually when you get the best blend of flavor and then bite.
I will say too that the fact that the whiskey for New Riff is darker makes it work with this bottle more. Like if it was light, like a standard Four Roses,
The
bottle
contrast would be way too stark.
yeah. So
I do like a lighter colored whiskey as well, or a bourbon. I like Four Roses, and I like, well, most Irish whiskey is also going to be pretty lightly colored.
oh yeah.
And, Irish
you
whiskey
find
is still the best in the world. There is no other, there are no better people that make whiskey than the Irish. But I'm willing to call bourbon something entirely different. I'm willing to put it in a different category. Why? Because I said so.
Listeners, just like and subscribe so that I can get enough money to treat him to something really nice, like a George T. Stagg or something.
What are you talking about? We're splitting the profits. That way I can get enough money to buy myself something.
Fair enough. Also, point out a liquor store that actually sells it for MSRP and not way more than MSRP.
Yeah, Macadoodles might.
It's the type of thing where you have to have a relationship almost sometimes with the liquor store, like to get that at MSRP, because they're very limited. Like,
also, it's one of those you're really rich and really important and you know a guy kind of thing. Or it's at the very least I know a guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, how'd you get that? Oh, I know a guy. That
it's one of those where, like, if we get a case,
which is
of
one
it
of the best
store,
feelings ever. By the way, if it's like, I've never experienced it, but I imagine oh, how'd you get that? Oh, I know a guy. It's like
it'd be sick to be in that position, wouldn't
it? Makes you feel like you're in Prohibition again.
Yep. But no,
how
like,
did you get beer in your house? I know a guy.
If you got like a case of George T. Stagg at Macadoodles or pick your liquor store, odds are the odds are almost 100% or have to be that you're not getting another case until next year. And that might not be a given.
Because it's in such short supply that they're like, all right, we'll part with one for you.
Yeah. So even if
we have one extra, we can let you have.
Yep. So even if the listed MSRP is like $150, secondary, they can go for thousands of dollars probably.
I mean, what would be really nice is if I could, get rich enough to just buy my own distillery.
There's that.
Or you and I buy a distillery together.
And a cornfield next to it.
Yeah. And then we start our own tobacconist so we can make corncob pipes and compete with the one in Missouri.
Yeah, that's how you show your patronage. But turning from good things to less good things, we're continuing our series on basically why the 50s are not to be idealized. And tonight we're going to discuss
the downfall of the family entirely.
That too.
As a whole, that's the ultimate question that we're asking here is what happened to the family? Mm-hmm. Looking at it today and then looking at it 150 years ago, what happened?
No, yes, we are.
In general.
But last week we talked about why the image of the 50s family, which is what I think many people would picture as like their idealized version of the family. Your dad has a job, there's a nice house, you have some kids, you have the house and the white picket fence, you have what people would think of as the American dream.
Mom, dad, kids, and family dog. That whole thing. Your dad comes through the front door, honey, I'm home. That sort of thing.
Exactly. So we made the case that is not to be idealized. If you question that premise, you're free to do so, considering, only if you watch last week's episode first. And then post a comment.
And we would agree with you, but then we would all be wrong.
But for tonight, we're going to dive more into how did we get here? Something that we do well in this podcast. How did we get to the 50s?
Yeah, where did the 50s come from? Where there's this sort of... Because if you missed the first one, I'll give a little recap here. Mm-hmm. The 50s is the dawn of... It's really like 1948, but for the sake of argument, we'll call it the 50s. It's the dawn of suburbia. It's the dawn of, we don't want to live out in the country, and we don't really want to live in the city either, because the city's crowded and dirty and all that. So let's live in the country, but not. Mm-hmm. We're going to live in the suburbs, which is a gripe I have every time my wife and I watch through I Love Lucy, which we have done like 12 times at this point, because that's, just something good and wholesome to have on the television for the kids, just as background noise. At one point, Lucy goes, "Oh, I want to move to the country. The city is so dirty and noisy and smelly." And then, her husband finally gives in, and What do? They don't actually move out to the country. They buy an acre in a suburb in Connecticut.
So then that is the country.
Because it's the country. So it's city people wanting to have that country life and country people wanting to maybe have some city life.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're coming back from the Second World War and going, well, there's nothing out here in the country. Maybe I want to go into the city. Or the fact that the country is always looking at the city and going, they're so sophisticated and so great. I want to live like them. So then with the suburbs, it's like, oh, well, look at this. You can kind of live in the city, but also keep some of the nice things of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And the city people are like, they tend to romanticize country living. We've all seen this of some random lady, random city woman, some yuppie who wants a country vibe in her house, but it just looks like Joanna Gaines has been allowed to do whatever the hell she pleases. It's not actually a country vibe in the house. That's basically what it is the they want their image of the country. They want their idea of the country, which is what they get in the suburbs.
And it's something in between, and it's nice in its own right.
It is, and it's not a complete evil. I think if people watch the whole episode, the whole previous episode, they're going to be like, well, the 50s were this horrible, awful, bad time. There were still many good things about the 1950s. People were still, like, women were still, I think, 90%, 93% virgins when they got married, which is a good thing. Families were still, at the very least, getting together for family dinner every night, so at least they're spending some time together. They're going to church on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
The rates of people actually going to church were way higher in the 50s than they are now. They're all together. They're going to church together on a Sunday, and in many households, they're praying together, either every day or at least once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And those are all good things. But the problem is that they created this picture where it's like everything has to look like this. And this is what your family should look like. But it's basically completely ignoring the entire first half of the century, pretending that didn't happen, and that didn't really have any effect on us. If your father served in the army, he was probably traumatized. He's probably hurt. He's probably broken. On top of that, he's got a half hour to maybe an hour commute to work every day because, the GI Bill let him go to school and get a degree so he can get a fancy office job in the city.
Mm-hmm.
So he's commuting an hour back and forth to work every day. He's working at least 8 hours a day. So he's away from home at least 10 hours a day, if not more. The kids are going to school and all being like crammed together in a classroom where, you're only with other kids your own age for 8 hours a day. And the only supervision is the one teacher that your parents just assume is qualified and competent and able to raise and manage all of your children. Which, as many teachers as there were, is not possible for all of them to be that qualified and competent. And then mom is left by herself at home. She's either overwhelmed on the days when everybody is home because children can be messy, or she's bored to tears because this is also a time when everything has to be as convenient as humanly possible. So dad's away for most of the day, even though he comes home every night. He's away all day. Kids are not around their parents, not around even one parent for the majority of the day, at least of the waking hours of the day. And mom is bored out of her mind. So she fills her time with bridge clubs and ladies' sodalities and other whatever types of meetings that she has through the neighborhood, which ultimately wind up just being massive gossip factories and massive gossip circles and places for women to complain about their husbands. And maybe like every now and again, there's a woman who has a husband that is genuinely excellent. But anytime they get together in a room and they share a flaw of their husband, every other woman in the room then starts finding other problems with her husband that maybe aren't even real problems. And all these other women in the room decide that they know her husband better than she does. And that is a terrible, terrible thing to do. And then, on top of that, throughout the 1950s, the contraceptive pill is introduced and promoted. As the pill was invented in 1952. And it was this sort of idea that, oh, look, we don't have to risk having too many children anymore, so you don't have to be as stressed out. We can just fix that with science. And that's probably something else that we'll get into in another podcast, but we'll sort of leave it there, because today we're mostly going to talk about where the 50s came from, about what created that environment, or where we got this idea that we have to create this cookie cutter, cardboard cutout of the perfect family, the perfect society, this suburban utopia.
Yeah. So ultimately, on multiple levels, it's like this thing attacks the family, and this thing attacks the family, and this thing attacks the family, and just everything is working to break it down. And it's not that the suburbs, as we said at the end of last week's episode, it's not that they're an evil place to live or something. Like,
it's not that they're inherently a bad idea. If you live in a suburb, great.
Yeah, there's ways to
your
do it.
HOA
right.
probably sucks, but that's just great.
Because no one loves HOAs. But there's a way to do the suburbs right and a way to do them wrong. Same goes to the city, same goes to the country. And we could argue about relative weights there and all sorts of stuff. But we should not look to the effects of the suburbs on the family and the form of the family that they helped produce as something to be idealized.
Yeah. Because the form of the family that is produced by the suburbs, not really produced by the suburbs, but the image of the family that is promoted is just sterile. It's bland. And it winds up being this, in an attempt to make something that tries to appeals to everybody, we have made something that has no substance and appeals to nobody whatsoever. So the suburbs are the Cracker Barrel rebrand of living conditions. Even though Cracker Barrel retracted that, which I heard about recently, they are the Cracker Barrel rebrand of living conditions, or the rebrand of basically any chain that made you happy when you were a child. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, pick one. They're the corporate rebrand of living conditions.
Yep. So turning from what happened to how it happened, to ask that question, how do we get here? So
we're going to look at the first actual half of the 20th century. And I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail, and there are going to be some things left out and other factors, and other people who have history degrees are going to yell at me and shut up. So if we look at the year 1900, before 1900, the vast majority of this population, and actually even if we go back further, if we go back to like 1850, at about 1850, the vast majority of the population was rural. They were farmers, laborers. They lived out in the country, or they lived in a small sort of town. You go into town for the basic supplies that you need, and you trade, and you do all that sort of thing. If you didn't live there, you lived in a city. And cities in the 1850s looked a lot different than cities do now. And I'm not really going to dwell on that, one, because I don't know a whole lot about it, but also because I want to skip ahead to 1900. So,
I mean, to suffice to say, perhaps we wouldn't have had the population boom. We wouldn't have had as many people living in them, like you said. So there's no way they could have been bigger. And even if they were even, I imagine that. No, I'll leave it there. There's no way they could have been bigger.
Yeah, the big city was like 150,000 people. I don't know what the population of New York City was at that point, but I know it was significantly. It might have been 1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of like the 17 million that it is now, or however many it is. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to not speak on it. But in the latter half of the 20th century, we have the the first workings of, or the 19th century, I should say, excuse me, we have the first workings of the Industrial Revolution, where we start making machines to do things, where we start building factories and having people work in factories. And this kind of kicks into full swing around the 1890s. And by 1900, the Industrial Revolution is full steam ahead. Even at this point, there's a lot of people that are rural, a lot of farmers, a lot of ranchers, a lot of people that actually genuinely live in the country and just live off of what they can work to do, off of what they can produce by working.
Mm-hmm. Off of just a normal life to that point.
They live off the work of their own hands, which is what the Old Testament promises us or tells us that we ought to do. You know, like most people for 99.9% of all human history have done. So, but here's what happens. In the cities, we have factories being built. And there are no labor laws. So the men in charge of these factories go, oh, well, we're just going to make our people work 12 hours a day. We're going to let them have one break because that's the moral thing to do, maybe. And we're going to pay them like shit because we want to maximize our profit and put as much in our pockets as we possibly can.
Do you know why there would have been no labor laws?
Because it was a new thing.
But people would have been working on farms before.
I think it's because it's a different kind of work. It's before this, most people were technically self-employed. Or if you employed somebody, you employed like a day laborer. Like say you own a wheat field. You go into the city and you look for people who are just kind of standing around looking for work, and you say, okay, I'll take you and I'll take you and I'll take you. Bring them back to your wheat field and you put a scythe in their hands and you say, I would like this section of the wheat field cut down by sundown. It's harvest time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's basically what work was. As far as employment goes, you know, you were a shopkeeper, or you were a store clerk, or you were a bank teller. Basically, it was understood that work stops at sundown, so we all go home.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another thing that happens in the early 20th century, the electric light.
Mm-hmm.
So the electric light comes around. Now we're going, ooh, we don't have to stop working at sundown. Because we have these electric lights, we can be working 24 hours a day. Now, they had gas lights back then, too. Mm-hmm. It's the gaslight era is what are called the gay 90s, which refers to the 1890s. The 1990s were very gay, too, but also in a different way. So the gay 90s and the 1890s, the gaslight period, you know, lamplighter was an actual job. Your job was to get up in the morning before the sun and put out all of the streetlights. And then at about sunset, to light all of the streetlights again, which were gas-powered. But there was still this idea that, okay, at sundown, we turn out the lights. Like, everybody should be going to bed at some point. Or we turn the streetlights on for, you know, because the rich folks are going to the opera or something. And they're getting home at 3 a.m. or something like that. Like, I think
most people are stopping work because your work is to a degree set by who's demanding that you work for them, who's demanding the product you're making. And if you're in smaller communities, then the electric light isn't going to change that much because, you know, Cheryl's probably not going to go visit the doctor's office or the general store at 9 o'clock at night.
Probably not. And even if the doctor is needed in the middle of the night, somebody is sent to his house with a candle or a lantern and says, Doc, you're needed.
Yep. But in the city, you're focused on making big things.
It's industrial stuff. So this is where we start seeing factories. Anybody that has played Assassin's Creed Syndicate knows what I'm talking about. Actually does a really good job of portraying what a factory was like. Now that's in London, and we're talking about the United States, but it was virtually the same thing.
Industrial Revolution, yeah. So
Industrial Revolution. So basically these factories where there's a line in one of the Wax and Wayne books from Brandon Sanderson too. I think it's in The Bands of Mourning, where Wayne is overhearing some men, because that's set in kind of the same type of time period. The Gaslight period, the gay 90s, and the early 20th century, just starting into the electric light. And Wayne is overhearing some men who are saying, one man says, I have to get up and go to work before my daughter gets out of bed, and she's already asleep again by the time I get home. So basically, because of the lack of scruples in the men who are running factories, because they want to maximize as much profit and as much product as they can, and because there's not really even enough people to have shifts, they're making people work 12, 14-hour days. At least. Some people are having to work 20-hour days.
Dang. Is that lack of people to take shifts also where child labor comes from?
Yes. Like, we're running out of workers? Well, bring the kids in, and we'll pay them 12 cents a week. 9 cents a week. 7 cents a week. Something like that. We'll pay you because you're small. You can't really work as hard as the grown-ups can. But children who should be learning and should be playing are now shoved into a factory when they're 8, 9 years old. And it may not even be the same factory that their fathers work in.
So I know inflation's a thing.
And a lot of that is also because there's not any safety regulations at this time either. So if machines break and accidents happen and somebody dies, it's kind of, we'll bury him and get somebody new.
So we're too focused on the wrong things.
So people get horrible, they get maimed and killed by factories.
Yeah. I know inflation's a thing, but what's the incentive for a kid or for his parents, more importantly his parents probably, to work for that wage?
Survival, because city life is expensive. This is also a time when a significant portion of city populations were immigrants. A lot of them particularly Irish or Italian, who were not considered white, barely even considered human, mostly because they were Catholic. And the Anglo-Saxon Protestant governing bodies and ruling class and upper class basically decided that they were going to borderline enslave them. You make $1 a week, your rent is 90 cents a week. They're paying insane levels of rent proportional to their wage to live in basically a single room tenement apartment. And this is what New York was like. This is what Boston was like. It's what Philadelphia was like. In most of at least the northern cities and in some of the southern ones too. But that's more of a discussion for, the Civil War podcast and the Reconstruction era that we talk about later on.
Yeah, and the religious and cultural motives political motives can all be delved into later because that's interesting.
Yeah, a lot of that just has to do with the Irish Catholic population being treated like they weren't even human. And Italian Catholic as well. Because those are the two major ones.
Yeah, those are the two biggest cohorts, followed by probably German and Polish, I think.
German and Polish. Occasionally some Spanish, but not really, because Spain was doing okay at the time. German and Polish. Maybe some Eastern European that would have also been at least Orthodox.
Okay.
If not an Eastern Rite Catholic. So The Industrial Revolution is a nightmare for the family, and if you want to know exactly how, go and read Rerum Novarum. Because Pope Leo XIII actually spends a great deal of time outlining why factories are bad. Or at least why factories, as they were being implemented at the time, were bad. Because it also wasn't just men and children. Women were being worked in factories too.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly in like dressmaking factories with sewing machines.
Yeah, textiles and the like. Sure.
Yeah. So that is the early 1900s. The unions are formed, and there's a lot of riots, there's a lot of protests, there's a lot of political movement that goes on. Finally, some labor laws are implemented, but at the same time, the First World War kicks off. Now, here in the States, we don't get involved in the First World War. We don't actively get involved in the First World War until 1917.
That's
I
like
don't
4
think any
years
of our
in.
troops landed 2 years in. It started in 1914. 2-3 years in, we get involved. And this will be important to the state of mind of fathers. The way that we trained soldiers was way different in the 19th century than it was in the 20th. Because when we decided, okay, we're going to go into this war, the powers that be looked at our manpower in our army and said, we don't have anywhere near enough troops to be able to send over. At least not enough that are trained well to where we think we can send them over to help. Because there's also a couple of places where the Indians are a little bit rowdy. We need them there. There's a couple of places just, we need to be able to defend our own borders.
Mm-hmm.
In case, the Mexicans or the Spanish get a little rowdy. We just beat them in 1898. So we need to be sure that we can protect ourselves too. So what they do is they enlist Blackjack Pershing and one other guy whose name I forget to come up with a method of training soldiers for battle as quickly as possible. This is kind of the first time when mass production mindset gets put into warfare.
Okay.
Basically come up with a method of training that will get as many men fit to the minimum level of combat as possible. And our army's numbers just explode at this time. Not to the degree that they did in the Second World War, but they still just explode. And we send over a whole bunch, and then the Allies win, which really means that the British and the French win, because we just kind of went over and kicked Germany while they were down and pretended that we won the war all by ourselves.
Was it a
Again, another
stalemate
discussion
before
for another
then
time.
because of all the trench warfare and such?
It was partially a stalemate, just again because of the way that warfare was done. And as a whole, too, the First World War was the first time that industry was applied to warfare. So when it started with cavalry charges and firing lines and, all of the old ways. It was 4 years long, 1914 to 1918. By the time that war ended, we had tanks, machine guns, and gas. The gas came first. But by the time that war ended, we had tanks and machine guns. So warfare changes drastically. I think the last organized cavalry charge in recorded history was in like either 1916 or 1917. It was a British unit. And the United States gets involved in the latter half of the war when they've started going into the industrialized version of warfare where we have machine guns and we have tanks and we have machines to kill people for us. We have machines that do our killing, and it basically becomes about killing as many enemy troops as we can in the least amount of time. So bombs get bigger, tanks become a thing, machine guns become a thing, because you can spray on a line with a machine gun and kill 75 men
Mm-hmm.
in a single, basically, volley of fire. So this is kind of the first time that men are going to war, and not really able to prepare themselves before the battle. Is in every war before this that we had fought, we kind of know when the battle is starting, so you can kind of psych yourself up for it and prepare yourself for it and work your way into it. At this time, you could be sitting in the trenches and a mortar lands between your feet. Or, I don't know, you could be sitting in the trenches and a bomb goes off. You could peek your head above the trenches or there's a lull in the fire, so you go over the top and all of a sudden a machine gun opens up and you and your entire platoon are basically dead.
Yeah, and the only time that's a surprise is if you're in like week 1 of the war.
Yeah.
After that point, you just know it's coming eventually.
You know it's coming eventually, but it's still not something that people have been wired for.
Well, exactly.
It's not a kind of warfare that man has been designed for. Like the kind of warfare that man was designed for was the kind where you can look your opponent in the eye as you killed him.
Yeah, and this by comparison is a slaughterhouse.
Yeah. And then when you take into account the gases that were used, you could be sitting in your trench minding your own business. It's a lull in the fighting. And all of a sudden the other side lobs a canister of gas into your trench. And you get to sit there and choke to death while you're watching your compatriots have the flesh torn from their bones.
Ugh.
Which actually happened to the Russians. The Germans actually had wound up with this myth that Russians were all but unkillable because I forget what gas it was, but they had launched a gas attack against a Russian bunker. And when they went in, the Russians' flesh was basically melting off of their bones, but they were still alive and fighting back. So technically, the Germans lost that battle until all of the Russians were dead from the gas. It was basically like the first account of basically finding and fighting zombies.
Which is more of the warrior spirit that we want. The type of thing that this war doesn't foster.
Yes.
Like that's
we
an
need to
outlet
fight
for
like
a
Russians.
reason.
Yes. So basically, we're going into war thinking that it's going to be like the Spanish-American War, that it's going to be like our Civil War, that it's going to be like 1898, or that it's going to be like the Mexican-American War. And there are enough people alive, and some of them who are in the military, that remember those wars and maybe served in them. But at this point, they're going in, and then what's that whistling sound? Where did this half of my men go? War and death happen so much faster and so much more brutally than they ever have before. So this is kind of where we first seeing what is now called PTSD. At that point, it was just called shell shock because there's documented reports of a shell hitting and exploding, and then a man who is physically perfectly fine, but he's laying there and he's frozen and he can't move, he can't think, he can't eat, he can barely even see,
and
he can't be reasoned with. He is just frozen in place.
Yeah, because human beings are designed more. I mean, it's not like you bring two cavalry forces together and they charge and it turns into a mosh pit. It's not like that's pretty and fun and humane and anything like that. But we're designed for that a lot more than being, to go back to the earlier analogy, just slaughtered.
Yeah.
Just you're in a pen. It's
then
called
seeing
a trench.
15 men die in about 5 seconds.
Yep.
That had never happened before, except in cases where there were, explosions and maybe at sea and, in some specific cases. Now at one point, it's just expected. And now warfare becomes about how many men can we just throw at the enemy until they finally give in? How many bodies can we sacrifice? It's, our soldiers are mass produced. They're a dime a dozen, and you cannot mass produce human life.
So that has a immense impact on men and society and the family, everything downstream of that. Yeah.
Because you cannot come from that, back from that, not broken in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you were a non-combatant, if you drove like a medical truck or something, if you were a medic or a doctor or a nurse, because a lot of women went overseas as nurses as well, the shit that you're seeing is going to stay with you.
Absolutely.
And that is going to break you. Many people, it is going to break.
Mm-hmm.
So they come home in 1918. We've won the war. Yay, everything is good. Until finally the dopamine wears off and, oh shit, I'm still missing a leg. oh shit, my buddy is still permanently crippled because of the gas. Or, oh, I saw 15 men die right in front of my eyes, and we were talking and laughing the night before.
And it
So a
happened
lot
like
of the
that.
same issues that the 50s had with how fathers were that I outlined in the last episode, we have now. We have in the like 1919 and into the 1920s in the home.
Mm-hmm.
With women, it's not, they're not quite in the same situation. But that's kind of where it starts, is that the minds of fathers start being broken. And it's not a lot. It's not a significant percentage of the male population of this country. I should also clarify, it's not a significant amount.
Because again, we came in at the end and
Yes.
only were there for that.
We didn't lose. We by no means lost the greatest number of men in that war.
No.
Not even close.
No.
I think it was like 20,000 or something. 25,000. Maybe 250,000, but either way, that's still very, very low compared to the next war we were involved in the 40s.
Yep.
So,
and speaking of losing a lot of men, we also had the Spanish flu around that time.
We had the Spanish flu that I believe was in 1918. So immediately after the end of the First World War, the Spanish flu comes around, and that takes out like 6% of the world population. So technically 6% of your local population. Everybody knows somebody that has been taken by the Spanish flu. On top of that, again, I'll mention here, no safety regulations in factories. So it's a toss-up whether or not your dad comes home intact from his factory job.
Yeah.
Because the machine he was operating might just have a bolt snap, and all of a sudden his arm is gone. Mm-hmm. Or all of a sudden, congratulations, you're basically an orphan now. And then your mom has to go and work in some other factory, and you, as the oldest child, have to go and work in some other factory, even though you're only 8 years old. Because you have to be able to support the rest of the kids. So that is like the first 20 years of the 20th century. Then we have the 1920s, which are called the Roaring Twenties for a reason. There's
I don't know that I've ever learned why they're the Roaring 20s.
There's parties all the time. Basically, it was the first great period of decadence. It's what happens after every major conflict. The winning side has a period of prosperity.
It's like it didn't
almost
make sense
all the
why
time after the major conflict. Because like we had the gay 90s, so we're happy and the gays, and we're happy and we're carefree. Then we had the Roaring 20s, where everything is just kicked into gear. High gear all the way, pedal to the floor. We're going to party, we're going to drink, we're going to smoke, we're going to have lots of sex in the 1920s. Lots of drugs in the 1920s. A lot of cocaine was done in the 1920s that a lot of people don't know about. Flapper culture comes out in the 1920s, which is an affront to God and man and just any sane, rational human being in general. But there's a lot of just frivolousness.
So what is flapper culture? Another thing I haven't heard of.
So the flappers are these women. Have you ever seen an image of like a party girl from the 1920s? You know, she's got her head covered by basically a skull cap. And she wears this dress that's basically just like a straight line dress. It goes down to about halfway, a little bit past her knees. That's covered in tassels. And a lot of dance moves come around at this time that are designed to make those tassels move. Now, that is meant to draw attention to the fact that she's not wearing any underwear.
Yeah, no, I haven't, and I'm glad.
So the 1920s are also a very sexually active time. A lot of sex, a lot of drugs. Basically, it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was like the 1980s, but almost.
Mm-hmm.
But without television. That's basically what it was.
Yeah, fair enough.
But again, we still have the upper class and the lower class. So the upper class is basically wasting all of their time and money on sex and drugs and rock and roll, while the lower class is having their backs broken in factories so the upper classes can have that life. Prohibition also comes around in this decade, early on in this decade. And that happens because a whole bunch of women got together. Because, like I said in the first episode, when a man comes home broken from war, there's no medical diagnosis and no medical treatment for it, he winds up self-treating. And the primary means of self-treatment was alcohol, was just to drink himself silly.
They can't remain alone with their thoughts. No, you're supposed to.
Yes, drink
you're supposed to in the right way, but
you drink because that's the only thing that quiets the thoughts. That's the only thing that shuts the voices up. And this also happens after war, after every war, when men always come home broken in some way from war.
Mm-hmm.
But there was just so many more of them from this war in particular than there had been before. Again, because the trauma happens so much quicker and so much more brutally than it had in wars previously, that we have a much higher percentage, even though it wasn't technically high. It's a much higher percentage before, and it's a much higher number of men who are self-medicated just by drinking. Now, their wives look at this, and because women are famous for misdiagnosing the problem, and they think, oh, alcohol is making my husband this way. Alcohol is what the problem is. So if we can get rid of that, then then my husband will be okay. So the temperance movement gets started. Women start marching down the streets carrying signs that say, lips that touch liquor will never touch mine. Which basically means I'm not going to have sex with you until you stop drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Even if your husband was not a drunkard, even if he had one glass every now and again, enough women get brainwashed, especially because this is a Protestant culture. Enough women get brainwashed into thinking, oh, that is an evil, so my husband needs to not do that. So the teetotaler movement gets started. We're like, oh no, we only drink tea in this house. We don't drink and we don't smoke, that sort of thing. That whole movement gets started. It's the temperance movement, even though it should have been called the abstinence movement, but it's called the temperance movement because Protestants don't know what the virtues are, and they called it the temperance movement because they think temperance is just not doing things.
Yeah, I don't care what your denomination is. Like, have a fun time trying to justify Puritanism to me in any type of conversation or debate. It just doesn't work.
In the words,
it doesn't make sense.
In the words of a Spaniard, I knew. A Puritan is someone who cannot stand anyone at any place at any time having fun.
Because that is a shortcut answer to all of the problems of life. Like, nope, we're just doing it.
It's the things that you find pleasant that are ruining you.
Yeah.
Your life, you should deliberately make yourself miserable in order to be happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I don't dare actually try and find the prudent, temperate, and virtuous mean in this situation. I'm just not going to bother trying.
Yeah. It's a different kind of spiritual laziness. And
yeah.
Practical laziness in the life of virtue. But
yep.
Anyway, so that gets started. We also have women's suffrage at this time, which only serves to exacerbate matters because women have convinced themselves that their husbands are beasts and that they're being horribly abused because they're doing chores.
Well, wasn't suffrage just about the right to vote, or was there more to it?
Technically it was, but it was also fueled by a lot of women getting up in front of other groups of women and saying, your husbands don't want you to vote because they don't want you to have your own opinions. They don't want you to think for themselves and blah, 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 blah. Even though the reason that women were not allowed to vote was because the man as head of the house was to vote as a representative of the entire household. Like, women in Sparta were trained for war, but they also weren't allowed to vote. And it was for the same reason, that their husbands, the idea, the logic is that they are discussing together and that their husband is voting for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Because the husband, at this time, not every man was allowed to vote either. You had to own, or at least for a long time in this country, you had to own land in order to vote. So not every man was allowed to vote either. I think those laws get changed sometimes in the latter half of the 19th century. because there's a lot of political hanky-panky that goes on.
So I want women to be able to vote for multiple reasons. One of them, I think they are equal to men in that sense. I mean, they're
Equal in dignity,
exactly,
not in kind.
which is that. I also think that the family is the fundamental building block of the society, and thus I want families to have more votes in them than individuals.
Exactly. I'm not
So
arguing the
I
fact
do,
that women shouldn't have the right to vote,
yeah,
or I'm not
but
arguing that women shouldn't, but we also these days, and I'll get
yeah,
to this when we talk about modernity, we these days have a lot of women who are voting against their own husbands, who are voting opposite their husbands.
we do have some,
And at that
and we
point, you should
obviously
not
will.
have the right to vote. If you think that you're going to if you're trying to discount your husband's vote, you shouldn't be allowed to vote.
So I'm
If you're
okay
voting
with
specifically to discount somebody else's.
allowing that because I assume that most married couples actually will vote the same because they are married after all.
I know my wife and I did. So
Yeah,
again,
it's
I'm
going to be
not.
shared
I
value.
don't
So
have an issue with having the right to vote. We'll talk about that at
yeah,
some other point.
yeah,
I think we have too many people voting. Too many people are allowed to vote that don't know what they're doing, and there needs to be a solution in that front. But we'll talk about that at
but fair
another
enough.
point.
Yeah,
It shouldn't just be you're a woman, you're not allowed to vote. I think.
yeah. The larger
Yep.
point though is even if you're arguing for something good from faulty premises and with faulty motives, you might achieve a happy outcome or at least a somewhat happy outcome, but not without collateral damage.
And that's kind of what happened with
Hmm.
suffrage is that technically what they were marching for was technically a good, even though like we of course there are many women that should have of course been allowed to vote, but there's also a lot of women because there's just a lot of people in general that should have no business anywhere near a voting booth because they have no idea what they're doing and no idea about how this process works or how this country is run. They just think, oh, I'm a citizen, I should be allowed to vote, and it shouldn't matter that I'm a woman. Well, you're technically right, but so and the suffrage movement is technically on the surface. It's kind of like the Civil War. It's on the surface about one issue, but there's about 10 other issues that it's really about. And, because it's women involved, they're raising hell about one thing when it's about 15 other things that they're really sore about. So they're mad about a lot of other things. And it's kind of the first major feminist movement in American culture. Or at least it gets a lot of attention in American culture because we don't have a suburbs in the 1920 per se. Like my house was built, this house and my neighborhood has been here since 1924, right smack in the middle of the Roaring 20s.
Hmm.
So we have neighborhoods that are built of like, oh, these groups of houses of, oh, this guy might be a banker and this guy might be a businessman and this guy might be a politician or this guy might be a professional of some other kind or this guy might be whatever. Uh, but it's not the suburbs.
Hmm.
It's just a neighborhood within the city limits, and you still have to leave your house. You leave your house and you go to whatever your place of business is, and that's also still not what the majority of people are.
Yeah.
So even in the city, in the most ideal circumstance, you probably live fairly close to your place of employment at least.
Hmm.
You lived in the same basic neighborhood as even if you were a factory worker, you lived closer enough to the factory that you could walk there because most people can't drive.
Yeah.
Especially in the city, there's no room to. But say you owned, like, say you were a cobbler or a tailor or a butcher, you probably lived above your shop because when cities are no longer able to go out this way, they go up. Um, and like 3-story buildings were the thing in the 1920s. And we start building buildings even taller. New York City starts getting higher and higher and higher. What also happens in the 1920s is that we have Henry Ford come in, who is going to basically completely change how we think of industry and how we think of factories. Because he comes in with the idea for the assembly line. The basic idea behind the assembly line is, well, right now, the only people who can afford a car are the upper classes. Because the automobile is a fairly new thing. And,
Hmm.
anytime a new technology is invented, or a new convenience is invented, it's almost entirely only available to the upper classes, only available to at least the relatively wealthy.
Yep.
Because it's a new thing. There's not a whole lot of it. There's only a few people making it. That's just the nature of things. But what Henry Ford does is he says, oh, so here's what we're going to do. Right now, the only people that can afford to buy a car are really wealthy people. Like, you saw a car on the road, you were like, oh, that's a rich man. You saw a car on the road, that's the equivalent of 30 years prior seeing a carriage with a hired driver. But now the carriage with the hired driver, that guy's not even all that rich anymore. The motor car, oh, that guy's rich. That guy's got it. But Henry Ford sees that as we need to try to make everybody equal. We need to make more people be able to buy cars. Because if we're going to make a lot of money off of cars, we need to be able to sell more of them. So we need to make them available to more people.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it in economics? Or in business economics, you've got the price of the materials, the price of the labor, which includes like the time and skill, which is, the time and skill required to make it. And then you got your profit margin. Those three things added together make up the final cost of your product. Well, to keep the final cost of the product low, one or more of these things has to be as low as humanly possible. So Ford significantly drives down the cost of labor by introducing the assembly line system, which is what produces the Model T, which, by the way, wasn't even a good car. It wasn't really. It was just like, oh, here, poor people, you want a car? Here's a car. Never mind that it'll break down in less than 10 years and completely fall apart, and there's like 4 Model Ts that are still working. Never mind that. Here's a car. So, and basically the assembly line is, if we envision it along a straight line, you start here with raw materials, and by the time you get to the end of it, you have a completed product. And you have like 75 guys along this line, each of whose job is to do one specific step of the process. Mm-hmm. So that way it can just move down the line to the next step of the process. And by the time it makes it down to the line, it's a finished product, and you can just keep churning them out day after day, week after week, churn them out on a mass scale. So this is the first kind of introduction to mass production. But as we know, mass production creates something that is inferior. And on top of that, I forget exactly what it is that the man said, but so Gustav Stickley, who basically started Gustav Stickley, who started the Craftsman movement in the 1920s, started it because he was sick of the assembly line. Because after Ford starts the assembly line thing, or he may not have invented it, but he at least, made it even more popular. After Ford starts the assembly line thing, it just sort of explodes. And now everybody wants to do it because, oh, this is such a great idea. It'll boost our production and it'll boost our profits. Mm-hmm. Gustav Stickley looks at that and says, no, wait a minute. Everything coming out of this isn't as good. Everything coming out of this process is not a very good product. They only last a couple of years and then they die. And on top of that, he is seeing how the workers are being treated. Mm. Because when you're a worker on an assembly line, all you are is a cog in a machine and a step in a process, and you're basically just a meat machine yourself. Mm-hmm. Your job all day, every day, is to punch a hole in a piece of metal. And you do that 10,000 times every day. Should also be of note that, yes, Henry Ford made the car more affordable, but the first group of people, or the least likely group of people to be able to afford one of his cars, were the people that worked for him in his factories. So the people that made them weren't able to buy them for at least the first 10 years of this system. Because Henry Ford also introduced the idea of the company store, which was basically a form of wage slavery that said, all right, so here's the company store that's right next to the factory. Everything that you will need, all of your basic survival needs, are going to be in the store. But you can only purchase things from the store in this company currency that I am paying you in Ford coin or whatever it is. I don't know what it was called. But you're being paid in this company currency that can only be used here. It's only good here, and this place will only accept that. Oh, you want real money? No.
They actually do that?
They did.
Like no actual US dollars over the top of that?
No US dollars. You were
Really?
not paid in actual US dollars because you were paid in company money that was to be spent at the company store.
What's funny is that there's an allure of community there in a very twisted sense.
There is, but it's like the worst possible way.
Yeah.
It basically is, you all work for me and I will provide everything for you, and you have absolutely no freedom outside of that.
Yep. Like we've said, every insidious lie has a truth at the center of it.
So the song 16 Tons, which was popularized by Tennessee Ernie Ford in the 50s, has a line in the chorus, I owe my soul to the company store. The company, actually, the final line of the chorus is, St. Peter, don't you call me because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.
Yeah, somebody was very depressed about that. I wonder
That
why.
is specifically in reference to coal mining, because coal mines did the same thing at this time, because you're maximizing profits. So when you're stocking the company store, you're getting the cheapest stuff you possibly can. That is probably also just old stuff that nobody else wants to sell anymore. And you're making deals with other companies to be able to stock this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the dress goods and the canned goods and things. A few dress goods so your wife can make some clothes for you and your children.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, this is the system that most men in the cities are put into. Unless you operate in a trade and you can actually make a living for yourself, this is what most men are put into. And even if you did operate in a trade, if that trade is rendered obsolete by the factory system or by the mass production system, you now just have to go and work in a factory and work on an assembly line where your entire existence is punching a hole in a piece of metal for however long it is, 8-10 hours a day, because I think at this point some labor laws have been passed, so they start reducing the workday.
Mm-hmm.
So you're punching a hole in a piece of metal for 8 hours a day, and what you're being paid in, you can't even go and spend at a store that you would like. You can't even go and buy something actually nice for your wife. The only thing that you can use this for is what is in the company store. You can only use your pay to purchase what your boss is telling you can have. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds an awful lot like slavery.
I see it. And even without going into the slavery label or whatever, that is fair enough. I mean, the company store we've said enough about.
It's basically wage slavery.
But just as an example from my own life, to like compare to the nature of the labor, like I could definitely use more things to do at my own job and a more variety of things to do and a change of pace and such, because I've been there for some years now. But I do tech support, so there's always different problems to solve every day, and there's plenty of repeats. There's only so many repeats you get. But there's still things that change over time. Different rollouts, different.
The order in which they show up might be different. So it's like
the order in which they show up might be different. You've got new things to take care of along the way, new things to learn. Fine. But comparing that to the type of factory job that you represent, like the fact that I can feel bored, the fact that I can feel burned out, like many people would in that setting, like you can only imagine what it would have been like in the setting you describe. Like, yeah. I have it infinitely better than they do. It's not even comparable.
So if you can imagine a man who has come home broken spiritually and mentally by a war, and then he is basically thrust into that, he's probably not going to be able to be a good father because he just can't.
It'd be very hard to.
So then the children that are raised in this environment wind up, growing up, and they're the ones that are raising children in the 50s. Mm-hmm. It's also worth noting that the in the 1920s, because we're not out of the 20s yet. I didn't realize there was this much to talk about with the 1920s, but we're still not out of the 20s yet. The stock market comes into existence in the 1920s. Another one of the greatest mistakes of the 20th century. But it's this, hey, why don't we let some people buy a portion of our company? Like, say we split our company into 100 pieces, and we let 100 different people buy a portion of this company. Then as the company becomes more profitable, those become more valuable, and they can get rich purely off of our success. So a lot of people buy into it because it's a get-rich-quick mentality. And a lot of people who maybe otherwise wouldn't do that buy into it because it's a get-rich-quick mentality. A lot of them don't actually really fully understand how businesses work.
Mm-hmm. But there is risk there.
All they know is that you've got that ticker in the corner that, you know, makes a happy noise every now and again, and then you feel pretty good about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And because every time a new technology or a new system is introduced, it is immediately just abused. The stock market gets abused. Like, to the point where people are buying and selling and buying and selling and buying and selling, and we're buying and selling so much so fast that one day in 1929, all of a sudden, buy what? Sell to who? Everything comes to a standstill. The reason it's called an economic crash, the reason it's called the crash of 1929, imagine if you will, a train going at 90 miles an hour and the conductor suddenly pulls the emergency brake. Or, you know, all of a sudden you can't go any farther. There's just a wall. There is nothing on that train that will be the way it was before. That's what happened in 1929.
Any economic people in the comments who are going to get grumpy and say something because that's not the best description, you're not wrong, but don't miss the fort. Get the larger point.
That's also exactly what happened to the entire world. Because so much was put into the stock market. The government was starting to rely heavily on the stock market for its wealth. Other countries were starting to rely on the United States stock market for their wealth. So much stock, if you can forgive the play on words, was put into the market that when all of a sudden there is no more stock to buy and nobody else to sell it to, well, now what do we do? And it happened like that.
As crashes can do.
It was just gone. So now, every company's stock is now so valuable that it's worthless. And all of a sudden, now everyone is a pauper. You could have been living in the mansion yesterday. Not anymore. Within a month, you have already sold all of your furniture. You've already sold your house for probably less than 1/100th of what it is worth, just so you can have something to eat, just so you can buy a loaf of bread for your children.
Well, even beyond the stock market too, this is, like you said earlier, this is a period of decadence. So when I think about the modern world,
so a lot of wealth is being generated and then like immediately wasted.
Well, it's being generated and being put into where? You've got rich people that are definitely going to get richer. But even beyond the stock market, like, look at what's happening today. If you're a normal American, like, you're kind of making ends meet. You can't afford the number of kids you might want to have. You're still going to go get the car that you need. And you're probably going to get a more expensive car than you want. And you're going to put way too much down on a car loan. And you're going to get the new phone and add on to this list a number of other things. And a lot more of you are not even going to have $1,000 in savings. You know, I assume that some of that type of behavior is going on in the decadent period that is the 20s.
It's even worse in the 20s.
Yeah.
Because the working class is being worked so hard they can't even put anything back.
Yeah.
And the upper class is basically taking all of their excess wealth and using it on excess.
Now what happens when all of a sudden you have no more
They're like,
income?
we got the money, why not spend it?
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens when the money stops rolling in?
It's kind of like Cinderella Man, isn't it?
That's exactly what happens in
Yeah.
Cinderella Man. That movie starts in 1928.
Yep. They're
Then
having
the
a great
very next
time in a
scene
nice
is in
house.
1931.
And then they're not in the nice house.
Yeah, they're in that really nice house. He's got that really nice bathroom. And this, again, another one of my favorite movies ever. Definitely in my top 10, which is weird because 3 of those movies are starring Russell Crowe. But anyway,
He deserves it.
he does deserve it. He's a good actor. So, yeah, the movie Cinderella Man is a very good illustration. Because his and his manager, his fight manager, played by Paul Giamatti in that movie, is also a really good illustration because he has sold every ounce of furniture he has just to put up a front that he is still successful.
Yeah.
Just so he can pretend to still have something.
Yeah, without spoiling anything, there's a really good scene that culminates in the revealing of that. So.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And it's kind of like that. And that actually happened to the Brannigan family. Battling Jim Brannigan was the champion, best paid boxer in the world. He was a very, very rich man. Then the market crashes, and he has to live in a basement with, what was it, 5 children?
I can't remember that detail.
I think it's 5. And he and his 5 children have to live in a basement. And he can barely make any money fighting anymore.
Yeah,
because the first reaction, is, well, now we have to, allocate all physical resources to our absolute needs. But even then, because another result of the crash of the 1920s, or the crash of 1929, so all these companies that just said, oh, we're going to maximize our profit and maximize our growth with all these factories that we're going to be producing stuff in, they are now no more. Because their stock has become worthless, and so has their product. So they've all gone out of business, and now the executives of that company are joining everybody else in the crowd at the docks screaming for a job. But the guy who runs the docks can only afford to hire 3 people that day.
Again, go watch Cinderella Man if you haven't.
Go watch Cinderella Man. It's the absolute best depiction of like the end of the Roaring 20s and at least the earliest half of the Great Depression. Because also what's happening at this time, prohibition is still in full effect at this time. And when you prohibit something, you make it more enticing, particularly if it was something that was legal before.
Yep, something has to fill that void.
And alcohol is kind of the only thing that is still in just as ready supply as it always was. So imagine even if you managed to get to the 1930s, not broken by the First World War, not affected by the Spanish flu, not broken by a factory in any kind. Say you're a cobbler or something and you manage to keep your business alive the whole time. By the time the crash comes around and in the Great Depression, you still have nothing. And now, because your job is not absolutely positively necessary for survival, because your job is not related to food and shelter, or maybe even not even shelter, just food. Now you're out on the street and your entire family is out on the street, and that happened basically overnight. So there's trauma from that. Because now you as a man feel like a failure because you can't provide for your wife or your children.
And so you might be sitting there thinking,
you have to go and beg a man that can barely afford to pay the people that he has now to give you a job so you can barely afford to put bread in your children's mouths.
Yep. So you might be sitting there thinking, well, okay, that all sucks. Obviously, like there is no arguing with that. But at least if you make the food, like food, there will always be a need, so you can survive that, right?
Nope.
Then, nope.
So who makes the food? Farmers. And who was like the most recent person or group to be affected by the Industrial Revolution? Farms. So this is also at the time, the 20s, and then into the 30s is when we start seeing these massive industrial farms that are, they use great big, noisy, and smelly equipment to basically harvest as much as humanly possible, to provide as much food as they possibly can, so that, again, we can maximize our profit. But the farm equipment in those days, it might be better now. Although I've driven past a field in Missouri at plowing time, it's not a whole lot better. Is so aggressive to the soil that it throws dust up into the air. So much that you can't even see. And if you live in a rural area and you have driven down the highway at plowing time when it's been relatively dry, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I came up to Minnesota for a wedding in May, and I had to drive through Iowa for part of it. And there were sections of road that I could not see at all because dust was being kicked up by the combine in the field. That much dust was being kicked up. So much of that, and on top of that, the railroad and other city expansion projects have cut down so many trees that it drastically reduces the oxygen levels, on top of how much dust and particulate is being kicked up in the air by industrial farms, that it creates the Dust Bowl, which is basically when Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa, which are 4 of the most major agricultural states in this country, and even into parts of Illinois and Indiana and Ohio, the most major agricultural states in this country got turned into deserts. Effectively, it was the worst in Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa. These states got turned into wastelands. Nothing wanted to grow. So now food is at a shortage. And Texas has the same kind of problem. Texas is agriculture in kind of every sort of way. If you don't have enough wheat crop, if you don't have enough vegetative crop, you also cannot feed your livestock. So then the livestock start dying. So then there's also famine.
Then somehow, if you've avoided all of the other trauma we've talked about, I mean, you didn't avoid this one, no matter where you were. A famine literally affects everybody.
Yeah, even if it's not directly affecting your stomach, it is affecting at least your mind. Because you're basically looking out your window every day and you see nothing.
Yeah.
And you see people hungry and starving.
I just think of the farmers too, and how I talked about hell last week as like being the place of ultimate loneliness. Like if you're in a rural community, I don't know, there's something about that image that rings true for that setting, where all there is dust and you can't grow a darn thing.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you have? You got whatever potatoes are left in the root cellar. That's what you got.
You eat literally whatever you can find.
Yep.
And some are able to grow some things. The Dust Bowl is not ubiquitous, but again, famine affects literally everyone.
Yep.
So at this point, then in 1938 or 39, I'm gonna hate myself for not really knowing the answer to that. Hitler marches on Poland, and by 1942, we are in the war. So when we first enter the Second World War, we have just come out of a First World War, a period of decadence by the upper class that has led to a period of famine experienced by everybody, rampant alcoholism because of the trauma from all of those other things. And now we're being thrust into a Second World War. And we have maybe recovered from that. I think technically the Depression ends in like 1938. It's not quite 10 years. It might have been earlier than that.
Dang, that's a long time, though.
It was a really long time.
Yeah.
I think the actual depression was only like 3 or 4 years. But full recovery doesn't happen until the very late 30s.
Yeah.
38, 39. because that's kind of when we start to see the film industry kick up again. And that's a good metric because the film industry was like in full tilt in the 20s, and most of that was crap. But then it sort of dies down a little bit, and then kicks off again in like the latter half of the 1930s, especially 1938. That's at least when 1937, 1938 is at least when John Wayne starts making big debuts. So I'm just going to go with that.
Sure.
And then the Japanese attack in 1942. And we say, oh, well, we can't have that anymore. We have just recovered from a lot of things. And we have managed to get our economy, and actually, at least as it appeared, fantastic shape in the early 40s. Most of that because of FDR putting Band-Aids on everything. I don't know that a single thing he did actually proposed a permanent solution, but he did a bang-up job of 20-year solutions, 10, 20-year solutions. So FDR gets elected basically on the platform that I will end the Great Depression. I will make you be able to eat again. And to his credit, he did. Then we get attacked. The Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor in 1942. And all of a sudden, now we had heard of this war, but this was kind of one that we were definitely determined to stay out of.
Yeah, it's like Germany can do
because
their
we
thing.
remember what happened the last time we got involved in a war in Europe. But then the attack doesn't come, the impetus doesn't come from the west or the east. It comes from the farther west, across the Pacific.
And then the Fire Nation attacked.
Yes, the Fire Nation attacks. The Japanese attack basically without warning. And we know we had been helping the Chinese fend them off a little bit, but we're pretty sure that, like, oh, they just kind of want China. They just want to attack China. They still have a beef with Russia. But no, then they just attack Pearl Harbor basically without warning. And they leave a lot of our men dead at the bottom of the ocean. And at this point, after the United States has gone through all of that and basically 5 seconds ago just gotten back on its feet, we go, no. So then we open up the engine, put the pedal to the floor, and we do World War II. Same as the first, a whole lot louder and a whole lot worse.
But without any of the charming music to it.
Yeah. So. And it's also worth noting that just after the Second World War, because that ends 1945, or 1946. I get my dates wrong. The purpose of a historian is not to have dates and places memorized. It is to know the effects of events on history and on the course of history. If you get things off by a single year, if you claim to be a historian and are going to bite me in the ass for that, you're not a real historian. Shut up. I don't care what your degree says.
To one of your points about our response to the war, what it kind of called to mind was a funny image of how America acts in wars since then, which is, well, we're kind of just all doing our own thing, but then, we don't know what we're going to do when we get attacked, which means we're just going to be very unpredictable and
we're going to be unpredictable. We're kind of going to sit here, and if we get attacked, we're just going to kill everything we see. Yeah.
But the way you presented that kind of brought that up, but put a dark spin on it,
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Because we have just recovered from all of that bad. And then the Fire Nation attacks, and we go, oh, not this time.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to be caught with our trousers down this time. We were somewhat prepared for a war. And within a year, we are the second most powerful force in the entire war. after Germany.
We've spun up the industrial engine before. We can do so again.
When we do it again, and we this time do the same thing we did in the First World War, but better, we train even more men for an even shorter period of time to be able to be fit for duty and fit for combat. But the results of that war on the individual are the same, if not worse, because this time the men that we are sending off to war are already affected by the previous 40 years.
True.
In some way. We have men who were born and raised during the Depression.
Well, there's the trickle-down effects of fatherhood, too.
Men who are probably inheriting some of the bad things from their father's trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were somehow managed to be, to go off into this war and be among the least traumatized people, the only way that you're coming out of the second one is by also being among the least traumatized of them. If you're in the Signal Corps, if you're a test pilot, if you're in the Seabees, that's the Navy's construction branch. Mm-hmm. They just build stuff for the Navy. That's all they do. They don't actually do any fighting. They may be armed for self-defense purposes, but they don't actually fight. But if you're in any combat role whatsoever, you're coming back broken in some way. Because you've probably seen some things. The only way you can be in combat and come back somewhat not really broken and kind of okay is if you're a pilot and you somehow don't see planes getting shot out of the sky on a regular basis. Or if you're like the navigator on a bomber or something. But what we have after that, basically the entire world has this mindset, but after the Second World War, in basically every aspect of life, everyone involved comes together and says, this is never happening again.
Good idea.
So the United States looks back at the last 40 years of what has been done and then goes, this is never happening again. So there's an attempt to learn from our mistakes. But culturally, we are thinking, never again are we just going to ignore people who are in pain. Never again are we just going to party until our arms fall off. And never again are we going to allow for an economic crash. And the suburbs are kind of born out of that. And this is why, while we shouldn't be nostalgically admiring the 1950s as some great utopia, we should also be very understanding of the people that made it.
Oh, I agree.
The people that thought of it. Because for the last basically 50 years of that century, this country experienced one form of chaos or the other. Because also in the 1940s, basically immediately after the Second World War, we had polio. And a lot of people...
We haven't had enough, somehow.
It's one thing after another for this whole century. We can't catch a break.
Yep.
After the end of the Second World War, it's like, oh, good. Polio now. Oh, good. Now I can't breathe and I can't walk. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm. I survived yellow fever.
I survived the First World War, the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, and now I'm stuck in an iron lung.
Yay.
Yay.
Said no one ever.
Yeah. So basically, I can fully understand why there might be this desire. It might not have even been a blatant thing. I doubt a bunch of people got into a room and said, hey, we've had a lot of chaos. Let's come up with something ordered. That there's at least a desire, or why the suburbs appealed to people.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody who has been experiencing a considerable amount of chaos for the last 50 years is now looking at that. Or they are the sons of men who were products of that chaos, are
Mm-hmm.
looking at that and they're going, I kind of want that. I want order. But basically, when you go from almost no order whatsoever to perfect order, or at least what's supposed to be perfect order, there's the whiplash effect there.
Yeah, because what you define as perfect is not going to be right. I mean, you're not coming from a good head on your shoulders and a good set of premises.
Exactly.
Unlike one of many modern examples of this is like the rise of Mamdani to however far he rises in New York, because so many
Yeah.
things are broken in our society. And so it's easy, as with so many things, to try and find a shortcut answer because I just need relief. I just need change. I just need some sort of security. And this guy's promising it, and that makes enough sense. Fine. Like, I'm going to go for that.
To
That's
be honest,
all. That's as straight as and this is a
Mamdani's probably not going to rise a whole lot farther than the 135 pounds he bench pressed, but
I hope not. But that's where, like, so many people can't reason more than that. And it's
yeah.
understandable where they're coming from too. But what you and I do, and this is why there will be people on both sides that attack us, is we're trying to find the sane mean in the middle of it, which
And
by definition takes the most work and the most courage.
as far as the family is concerned, because this ultimately, this brief series is about the family.
Yeah.
And the effect on the family. The state of the family was mostly broken for the first half of the 20th century.
Yeah. And so we think we're just going to create the perfect one afterwards.
Like in the 1920s, there was a considerable rate of girls running away from home and eloping and getting married when they were 13 or 14.
In what decade?
The 20s. My wife's great-grandmother did that. She ran away from home in New York to Oklahoma with some guy that was 10 years older than her. And got married when she was like 14 and came back a few years later with 3 kids.
I guess nothing bad can happen from that.
No. Nothing at all.
Yeah.
But
something good did come from it, your wife. But
ultimately, yes, it took a few generations.
Yeah.
At which point, I'm kidding. I love my wife's grandfather. He was a wonderful man. But although that was on her mom's side, or on her mother's side, that was her mother's mother's mother. So her truly maternal great grandmother, going back 3 generations.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, people eloping during the 20s and other stuff.
But there is a rate of that happening. People are getting married way, 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 way too young. And there are economic and cultural reasons for it. And that's not really good. We have people that are getting married definitely before they're ready, having children before they're ready to have children.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I'm one to say, oh, you should wait until you're ready to get married. But what I mean by ready is like you have a job and you're probably at least somewhat financially ready. That you and your intended have a job and you're somewhat financially ready to get married. What the world means by ready today means we have to have everything in order completely and totally before we get married. And that
never happens.
Because that's a reaction to what was happening when people were wanting to get married far too young. And they're wanting to get married basically in high school or before high school, stop their education, stop everything, and neither of them are really working, and they're just going to go and get married because of some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Which almost never produces well-adjusted and stable people. The most that we can hope for is people who can at best pretend to be well-adjusted and stable, which after the 1950s is what America is really good at. America is very, very good at pretending to have everything put together. We're very good at making everybody else think that we know what we're doing.
Yep. And to your earlier point, it's kind of just like it's the best they can do. It's broken, fundamentally.
It really is.
But
because by this point, we're like 2 generations in, or it's the 3rd generation from the one that was in power at the beginning of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. And that generation in the middle, before what we call the greatest generation, the one that went off to war during the First World War, they basically lost everything that they knew how to do. Everything about being human that they really knew, they completely lost. So one analogy that I sort of heard was that the greatest generation was raised by people who basically just who tried their hardest and who thought they were wealthy, but wound up passing on a jar full of rusty nails as their only legacy. And say, here, build a world out of this. But this is all they had.
And so the trick for us, to again go back to the fact that so many people idealize the 1950s, is to, on one hand, say this is the best they could do with what they did. But on the other hand, not to idealize it. It's like, no, this is just a stepping stone. This is a stepping stone back to something that ultimately is actually good, true, and beautiful in a higher way.
It is a stepping stone back, and they are reaching for it, but they miss so badly in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
Because
you and I can be the part of that journey that actually hits what they should have hit.
Which, let's be honest, you're not ever going to hit the mark until you're actually in heaven. Not ever fully, really.
This is why you aim for heaven.
Perfection
and hit
is not to really aim for heaven, because at worst you'll hit purgatory. If you aim for purgatory, exactly. I don't want to tell you where you're going to land.
Exactly. Even if you're not going to be perfect, you still owe it to yourself to aim as high as you can.
Yes, purgatory is happy torture because there's heaven at the end of it.
Yep.
Once this is through, I will be in heaven, and then I can do the work of being in heaven. But I think, and I fully understand it, but the great mistake of the 1950s was we are going to create a perfect society now.
Peace now.
We are going to eliminate all of the problems of the last 50 years, and we're going to put forward this image of, father is head of the family. So dad goes out to his office. He spends all day at the office, and he comes home, and dinner's ready, and they all eat together, and it's all happy-go-lucky, and he reads the paper in the morning, and maybe the evening paper at night. He smokes his pipe, he wears his slippers, and then he goes to bed, and then he gets up and he does, the same thing the very next day. That is actually a very pleasant image. It is very appealing. And the suburbs are this fully modern convenience, and you have everything that a wife or a mother would want right nearby. You've got parks, you've got schools, your children will be perfectly well taken care of. You can sit on the counter and drink tea because your children are taken care of, and you've got the latest and most modern conveniences and appliances, the best vacuum cleaners, the best ovens, the best refrigerators. Everything is efficient and great.
And on the backs of all of those mechanical servants, you can finally rest.
Yes.
And boy, is there an incentive for rest.
Except it wasn't like that. And I illustrated it in the last time why it wasn't. Again, I understand why the image and why the illusion was appealing.
Oh, yeah.
Because we can't just look at that and go, well, the 1950s said they were great, but they really weren't all that great, so they were horrible, so we just need to completely topple them. That's what happened in the last half of the 20th century, and we're going to talk about that next time. And we'll see you then.
We'll see you then.